You have likely heard much discussion about DNA, seen many news stories, maybe even purchased a DNA kit or considering purchasing a DNA kit for your own family history. Once you have taken that DNA test, what can you do with your results? What options are available to you? My presentation today will have real-life experiences and application. Nevertheless, DNA is still an evolving technology, therefore far from mature. Hello, my name is Michael Kennedy. I work for FamilySearch. I'm also president of the Joe Smith Jr. and Emma Hale Smith Historical Society, a non-profit historical society, researching the history and posterity of Joseph and Emma, founders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Before we get started, a little background. As you know, your DNA is inherited from your parents, your mom and your dad. Some of that DNA you also inherited from all of your ancestors. If you were to stretch your DNA contained in your body in one continuous line, it could cover the distance from the Earth to the Sun and back 200 times. Your DNA is contained in all the cells of your body. Inside the nucleus of those cells is nuclear DNA, which is inherited from all of your ancestors. You have 46 chromosomes in that nucleus, 23 from your mom, 23 from your dad. There is also a mitochondrial DNA not found in the nucleus, but in the cytoplasm of your cells. You inherited this chromosome only from your mother. Dads, you have this chromosome, but you cannot pass this one on. Knowing this can help you investigate your ancestors' lineage a little better, even help you determine who your cousins are. Law enforcement has used this type of DNA to help them find some of those bad guys. DNA has no value by itself. It is only useful when compared with DNA from others. This comparison is what helps determine relationship. Comparing entire family trees can help you determine a common ancestor. You have 50% of your DNA from your mom, 50% from your dad. Thus, your brothers and sisters also have 50% of their DNA. Your children will have 50% of your DNA. Your grandniece and nephew will have 12.5%. Your grandkids will have 25%, and so on as this chart describes. With that background and the technology available today, so what can you do with your DNA? One, you can take a DNA test to determine your parentage. That technology has been around for some time. One caution though, be prepared for the answers that you're going to receive. DNA testing can help you determine if you descend from a particular ancestor. It'll help break down brick walls. For instance, I had an ancestor that we could not get past England until the DNA test told us to go look in Ireland. DNA can help break down your ethnicity and help you determine what your ancestral migrations are. My brothers, not genealogists, always believed they were Irish, but taking their genealogy DNA test, they learned that they were Scottish. DNA can help you to learn some of the propensity for certain types of diseases. It'll help you leave to your descendants a little more information about who you are. And it also helps get past no written records. Let's dive into each of these in a little bit more detail. As mentioned earlier, DNA only has value when compared, and that comparison is even better when compared to samples from around the world. Pictured on this slide is Niall of the Nine Hostages, an Irish king who died around 405 AD. I know genetically he is an ancestor of Joseph Smith, a direct ancestor. Genealogically, I haven't tied to him yet. We know genealogically we can take Joseph Smith to Topsfield, Massachusetts, and from there to England, and go back 3 or 4 generations. But we cannot go any further than that. We know there must be some form of migration, but from where? Genetically, there is a database that has indicated many descendants of Nile of the 9 hostages, in which Joseph Smith's DNA compares almost exactly with many of those others that were in this database. So we know there is a relationship there. That tells me, genealogically, instead of searching in England, to go to Ireland. But because of genetically, we have a place to look. Here, for example, are my results from ancestry.com. It indicates I'm 100% European, composed of being 29% Ashkenazi Jewish, French and German about 22%, British Irish about 21%, and so on. Last year, these percentages were lower, about 4% across the board. They provide a map of that breakdown as well. This is fun to know, but let's compare my DNA with another company's database. Using the same DNA results that I took from Ancestry.com, I uploaded to MyHeritage. Now notice here that MyHeritage indicates I'm almost 20% Ashkenazi Jewish. I'm about 28% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. I'm about 8% Balkan, and about 40% North and West European. Now, Ancestry.com is an American company located in Utah. MyHeritage is an Israeli company located in Yahuwah, Israel. So their customer base will be different than Ancestry's customer base. And so Ancestry did not give me any results about the Balkans. They did tell me they have a difference in the size of Ashkenazi Jewish, difference in size of Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, and North and Western European. But you noticed in MyHeritage, their breakdown on countries is different than Ancestry. So be aware of those subtle differences. And no, that doesn't mean one company is right and the other is wrong, or one is better or worse than the other. It is the size of their database. And the best is comparing with more than one company, one database, to get the best results. And many of these other competitors will allow you to upload the results from one company to another company to get a free report. Each DNA company has their own specialties. Areas of genealogy they focus more on than maybe one of their competitors. Be aware of these specialties. For instance, here, using the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA, you can analyze the migration of your surname. Because of the mutations in your Y DNA, geneticists can place your results in different haplogroups. A haplogroup is a pedigree chart of different clans of the human family. There are also male and female haplogroups. For instance, if your haplogroup happens to be I1 or R1A, R1B, G2, or N, you are probably from Viking descent. Genetic testing can help you determine which haplogroup you belong to or which clan your family is from. Chromosome mapping is the comparison of DNA from various individuals and trying to link them to a common ancestor. These 4 women have an interesting story. 3 of them were raised together by the same mother and father. They're all sisters. The 4th is also a sister. However, she was given up for adoption when she was an infant. After the adopted child matured, unfortunately, she developed cancer. And one of the medical questions that she was asked was if her family had this type of cancer in her family. Her husband, who happened to be a detective for the San Diego Police Department, decided to track the adoption records and learn for himself, since he loved her very much, as to who her biological parents were. So after identifying her biological parents, he did the genealogical information to track the family down, which led to one of these sisters. The one sister and the adopted sister elected to do a DNA test, and they came back with a close family relationship, indicating they had the same mother, but both had different fathers. This was the first time they learned their mother had given a child up for adoption. One of the other sisters in this photo decided that that was rather interesting and elected for herself to take a DNA test. And she learned that she still had come from the same mother and yet a different father. And so this started an interesting family history, and from that DNA test, eventually they learned that there were 2 other sisters and a brother that was part of this larger family. And so they had some brothers and sisters that they were never aware of, and had a family gathering to initially acquaint themselves. Chromosome mapping can help you validate your biological parents, your siblings, extended family, even up to second and some cases third cousins. Chromosome mapping is also very useful in the comparison with the DNA of other individuals to help identify the propensity to certain types of medical traits. Chromosome mapping has provided firm evidence that a disease such as diabetes can be passed down from one generation to the next. There are a few DNA companies, such as 23andMe, that specialize in detecting or identifying what particular propensity you have to certain medical conditions as well as other physical traits. But you should always remember that when taking genetic testing for certain types of medical predisposition, remember, it is a predisposition. That doesn't mean you will get the disease. It means you are predisposed to do so. There are a lot of other conditions, such as diet, your environment, the way you exercise and take care of yourself, that contributes to that. There is another example of a brick wall with the Joseph Smith family that we were working on, or rather what we were trying to resolve. It is well known that Joseph Smith was the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and most know that he also instituted the Celestial Marriage Covenant, or polygamy. There are many individuals who had come forward indicating that they were descendants of Joseph, but not through Emma. And so we decided to use DNA to resolve that problem. Using the Y chromosome, we identified all the descendants of Joseph Smith whose surname genealogically was Smith, meaning Joseph Smith's sons to their sons, to their sons, to their sons, down to our living date. I probably should give you a little background here. Joseph and Emma are my third great grandparents, which means I have Joseph and Emma's DNA in me. And I had this assumption that my DNA would have markers in them similar to all of my cousins. Therefore, if we identify those markers and compare them to anyone who wishes to claim that they have a descendancy of Joseph Smith, then genetically they should also have those same markers. So by taking a DNA test for all the descendants, living descendants of Joseph Smith whose surname was Smith, we could establish a baseline. And comparing son to son to son baseline with my DNA, there should be some matching markers. And that proved true. Then by extension, we can test all of my cousins to see if they also had those same markers. We used the genealogy to identify all the descendants of the prophet Joseph Smith. We learned that he had a total of over 2,500 descendants down to my grandkid age. Out of those 2,500 descendants, there's approximately 1,900 or so that are living today. Out of those 1,900, we had 500 volunteers who were willing to share their DNA with us so that we could make this comparison. So in 2005, at one of our family reunions that was held in Salt Lake City, we, as part of the programs, took DNA tests from the participants. The results of that DNA test proved and verified that both genetically and genealogically, they indeed were my cousins. With that baseline established, we then could send requests out to all of the descendants who believed that they were descended from Joseph through someone other than Joseph's wife Emma. We would be able to identify that genetically. If Joseph Smith, as I mentioned earlier, were standing next to me now, living, genetically speaking, I would know no difference taking a live DNA test from him now as we did then, because it was the results are that accurate. After collecting the DNA from all of those who believed that they were descendants of Joseph Smith through another wife, we learned that in 100% of those cases, none were true. They did not descend from Joseph and Emma. And so that resolved a question that has been in the minds of those who are interested and who really were or were not descendants of the prophet Joseph. Now, in this test during 2005, we were using the Y chromosome, and we were using the male descendants. Well, mitochondria DNA was not as advanced technologically in 2005, but by 2016, mitochondria DNA testing had advanced, and so we decided to repeat that test. This time, instead of the sons, we could also involve the daughters and do genetic testing of the females of all the descendants of Joseph and Emma. Within that genetic testing, we were able to validate that they matched the same genetic structure that I have in my DNA, as well as all of the direct descendants with the surname Smith. Using DNA, your ancestral migration, your health traits, medical propensity, using chromosome mapping. These are many tools to help genealogy, not replace genealogy, but to help prove your genealogical research. The genealogical research itself is still very necessary, but one helps validate the other. I hope this information has been useful to you. If you have questions that I have not been able to address, at the beginning of these slides was my email address. Please feel free to contact me. I would be glad to answer any questions that you may have and help you point you in the right direction for any work you want to do. And it's particularly important that whoever you do your genetic testing from, that you obtain the raw data yourself and to hold on to that raw data. Thank you for your time. Contact me again with any questions that you may have, and I appreciate the time you were able to spend. I know how valuable that is to you.